I'm deeply concerned about the situation in Georgia.
Saakashvili is a threat for stability of this country.
Russia is a terrorist state.
The area being fought over is South Ossetia.
I think Russia's right.
Somehow Georgia and Russia, they don't have a very good relation.
The Russians are in Gudauri. Georgia started this war.
What the Russians want is to teach Saakashvili a lesson.
So now you cannot go to Abkhazia from the Georgian side.
It was Georgia that attacked South Ossetia first.
Georgia will never, ever surrender.
The hypocrisy of the so-called international community knows no bounds.
Georgia is a beautiful country in the lap of the Caucasus Mountains. I was so keen to explore the whole country, but then I realized that I could not visit these two small territories inside the country. This didn't make much sense to me. I had never heard of Abkhazia and South Ossetia before. Abkhazia is this small territory along the Black Sea coast, sandwiched between Russia and Georgia. But they have their own elected government, own foreign minister, and you would even need an electronic visa or entry permit to visit Abkhazia. That sounds like a separate country to me. In December 2023, when I visited Georgia, I found a lot of anti-Russia and pro-EU graffiti on the streets of Tbilisi and Borjomi.
आप जब भी घूमते हो यहाँ पे बहुत सारे ग्राफिटी देखने को मिल जाएंगे और बहुत सारे जगह पे यहाँ पे रसिया के प्रति हेट ये लिखा हुआ है. मैं आपको एक दिखा देता हूँ. यहाँ पे लिखा हुआ है रसिया. ये देखो, ये लिखा है ना, ये लिखा हुआ है.
To understand why there is such a huge resentment for Russia among Georgians, you have to go back slightly in the history.
In the late 18th and early 19th century, Georgia became a part of the Russian Empire. After the 1917 revolution, Georgia officially became a part of the Soviet Union. So it became a republic of Georgia as a part of the Soviet Union. So within Georgia, so there are few autonomous regions. So one of the regions is Abkhazia and one of them is South Ossetia.
Now, there were no major conflicts between Georgians and ethnic Abkhaz population during the Soviet Union era. But things went downhill after the fall of the Soviet Union. In April 1991, Georgia declared its independence from the Soviet Union. There were several ethnic groups in Abkhazia and South Ossetia who wanted an independent country of their own. Now, nearly 50% of the population of Abkhazia was ethnic Georgians in 1991, while nearly 20% of the population was ethnic Abkhaz. Other 30% were Russians, Armenians, Greek, and people of Turkic origin. Typically, non-Georgians in Abkhazia wanted an independent country, while Georgians wanted to merge with the independent Georgia.
So there was a civil war between Abkhazia, which used to be a semi-autonomous region during the Soviet era time. There were several separatist groups in Abkhazia and South Ossetia who wanted to be an independent country. So the Russia also supported the separatists.
The civil war in Abkhazia was very brutal. That led to the ethnic cleansing and genocide of the Georgians in Abkhazia. Although Georgians were in majority in Abkhazia, more than 200,000 of them were kicked out of their homes. More than 20,000 Georgian homes were burnt. Schools which used to teach in Georgian language are also burnt down. After the civil war in 1993, the population of Abkhazia was almost reduced to half.
After the 1993 war, the Georgian citizens could not enter Abkhazia.
Any return of Georgian refugees to Abkhazia will lead to clashes and new bloodshed.
Although there were several incidents of conflict and armed fights between Georgia and Abkhazia, or Georgia and South Ossetia after 1993, but things started to escalate again when an anti-Russia government was elected in Georgia in 2003.
In the 2003, there was a regime change in Georgia. So that regime, the new Georgian government in 2003, it was very pro-West. It wanted to be a part of the European Union. It wanted to be a part of NATO.
This new government, led by Mikhail Saakashvili, also wanted to form a reunified Georgia with South Ossetia and Abkhazia as its integral part. So this led to several tensions, killings, bombings, etc. between South Ossetia and Georgia.
in 2008, the tensions became very serious when NATO said that they could annex Georgia and Ukraine as part of NATO. So NATO had been expanding eastward in the early 2000s. So several countries like Lithuania, Estonia, they became a part of NATO. So NATO was almost at the borders of Russia. So Russia had previously warned NATO not to expand eastward. So as Georgia and Ukraine started to show their interest in joining NATO, so that's when the conflict became much more serious. So on 1st August 2008, some separatists in South Ossetia, they attacked the Georgian people. So in South Ossetia, there used to be both Georgian people living as well as the South Ossetian people. So as you know, Georgia is a very unique language. It's a totally different type of language of its own. At the same time, South Ossetia and Abkhazia, these people are quite different. They have their own language, they have their own culture. So they wanted to be an independent country. So after the Russian-backed separatists attacked the Georgian villages, so the Georgia sent its troops to fight against them. Then Russia jumped into the war, and after 5 days of fighting, the Georgian forces they left, and South Ossetia was under the control of the Russian-backed separatists. Then at the same time, in Abkhazia also similar firing started.
In the 2008 Russia-Georgia war, Georgia lost control of the Gudauri valley in Abkhazia. This area in the red in the map was actually lost by Georgia during the 2008 war. The green area are the Georgian territories that was initially lost by Georgia in 2008 during the war, but later when a ceasefire agreement was signed, Russia returned them back to Georgia. So basically, Georgia in a way ended up losing more territories in 2008.
The president defends his tactics that helped to spark this war.
And this was very well planned, very well prepared, and if anybody has any doubts, study the situation.
While from a very popular perspective, it may seem that Russia really started the war in 2008, but several reports, including a report from the European Union, confirm that the war was actually started by Georgia. Well, there were several provocations from Russia, no doubt.
Accused the Russians of violating its airspace and firing a missile at the village of Tsitel-Ubani, 65 kilometers from the capital, Tbilisi.
There was an ethnic cleansing of Georgians in Abkhazia in 1993. Now, after the 2008 Russia-Georgia war, there was an ethnic cleansing of Georgians in South Ossetia. Many Georgian homes were burned down in South Ossetia. More than 20,000 Georgians from South Ossetia were permanently displaced and they never returned.
In 2008, it was a major war. It was the first war in Europe in the 21st century. So the Russia-Georgia war was the first war in 21st century fought in Europe. So it was a very, very important event because I can say that Georgia was the first Ukraine. So what is happening in the Donbas region of Ukraine, what happened in 2014 and onwards, and now the war. So you could estimate the outcome of the Russia-Ukraine war from the Russia-Georgia war. Russia did not want Georgia to be a part of NATO. So when Russia waged a war against Georgia, so that means it cannot join NATO anymore. According to NATO's principle, an attack on one member state is equivalent to the attack on all the member states. So if there is a war between Georgia and Russia and Georgia becomes a part of NATO, so that means there is a direct war between USA, European Union countries and Russia. So somehow the 2008 war did not work out in the favor of Georgians. It was in favor of Russia. So Russia managed to push the Georgian troops out of Abkhazia. They managed to push the Georgian troops out of South Ossetia. So today, South Ossetia and Abkhazia, these are the two autonomous regions. They have declared themselves as country, but only 5 or 6 countries, they recognize them as countries. One interesting thing is Nauru is a country in the Pacific Ocean. It supports and it recognizes Abkhazia and South Ossetia. There is diplomatic relations between South Ossetia, Abkhazia and Nauru. So apparently there are allegations that Russia provides funds to Nauru to establish these diplomatic relations. So Nauru, that's why supports these two governments. Some other countries are like Venezuela, Syria,
Syria has now recognized Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Bashar al-Assad is propped up by the Russian regime.
There is only one way to go to South Ossetia. You have to go via the Russia. You cannot go to South Ossetia from the Georgian side. You need a multi-entry Russian visa to go to South Ossetia. To Abkhazia, you could earlier go from Georgia as well as from Russia, but after the Russia-Ukraine war, the entry from the Georgian side has been cancelled totally. So now you cannot go to Abkhazia from the Georgian side. If you have to go to Abkhazia, you need a multi-entry Russian visa. The e-visa that Russia currently offers to Indians is only a single entry visa. So you need to go to the Russian embassy and file for a multi-entry visa, and only then you can visit Abkhazia. In Europe, there are several partially recognized countries. One is South Ossetia, one is Abkhazia, and these are two in Georgia. There is one in Transnistria, it's in Moldova. There is one more called Kosovo. So Kosovo is also a partially recognized country. Around 50% countries in the world, they recognize Kosovo, but 50% don't recognize Kosovo. When it comes to India, India doesn't recognize any of these separatist regions. So anyways, so that's everything about the modern history of Georgia. So recently in 2023, in December, a few days before I came to visit Georgia, Georgia became a candidate member of the European Union.
First to be accepted as the candidate country of the European Union. All of us count on your support.
Moldova and Georgia, they were not the candidate member of European Union because they did not meet certain level of infrastructure standards, and there was a certain level of corruption. The European Union recently has become more inclusive, and I think that was a big celebration in the country. I could see a lot of places where the European Union flag and the Georgian flags were flying side by side. And in many places I found there is a graffiti that says Russia is a terrorist state. So they call it Russia is a terrorist state. You can find this graffiti all around. So somehow Georgia and Russia, they don't have a very good relation, but still around 10% of the people support Russia. So 90% of the people, they were very happy about Georgia being a candidate member of the European Union. I think that's a great start because European Union, as you know, is more capitalistic, it's more democratic, it's more transparent. So I think that would be good for Georgia. That's my personal take.
Russia and Georgia were not enemies before the Soviet era, and this structure is a witness to this.
ये है जॉर्जिया रशिया फ्रेंडशिप मोनूमेंट। ये मोनूमेंट 1983 में बनाया गया था, तो उस टाइम जॉर्जिया रशिया का पार्ट था, और ये मोनूमेंट इसलिए बनाई गई थी कि 1783 में एक ट्रीटी साइन हुई थी। जब रशिया का जो एम्पायर था धीरे धीरे बड़ा होना चालू हुआ, जब रशियन एम्पायर पावरफुल होना चालू हुआ, तो उस टाइम उसने जॉर्जिया को प्रेशराइज किया, और जो कार्तली काकेती, जो ईस्टर्न जॉर्जियन रीजन्स के किंग्स थे, उन्होंने एक ट्रीटी साइन किया था जॉर्जिया का प्रोटेक्टरेट स्टेट बनने के लिए। उसके 200 साल जब पूरा हुआ तो 1983 में ये मोनूमेंट बनाई गई थी। प्रोटेक्टरेट का मतलब ये है कि रशिया ने ये बोला कि हम आपका डिफेंस और फॉरेन अफेयर्स संभाल लेते हैं, आप अपना इंटरनल अफेयर्स देख लो।
Looking at this Russia-Georgia friendship monument, I see hope. Although South Ossetia initially wanted to stay as an independent country, today it wants to merge with North Ossetia and Russia. However, this hasn't yet happened. Abkhazia still maintains that it wants to be an independent country. The game of geopolitics is actually very interesting. Especially with Abkhazia, the hypocrisy of the Western countries is quite palpable.
The hypocrisy of the so-called international community knows no bounds. If the US and Europe actually forced the independence of Kosovo, they should have to admit that the independence of South Ossetia and the other separatist Georgian province, Abkhazia, is also in the cards.
While most Western countries like France, Germany, UK and USA support the independence of Kosovo from Serbia, calling it the people's choice, they don't really recognize the referendum held in Abkhazia. Abkhazians have always wanted an independent country since 1990, even before the dissolution of Soviet Union.
I hope you found some insight about the history of Georgia. I hope you liked this video. If you liked this video, then do like and subscribe to my channel.